So good morning, everyone, and welcome back, and welcome to all the old comers, the newcomers, and the returnees. Bart came back, although I don't see him. Here he is. I see his planet Earth behind him. Anyway, welcome, and so we're going to learn today about Parshas Tazria. Tazria Mitzorah are typically, I guess most years it's a double portion, Tazria Mitzorah, double portion. And this year it's a single portion because it's a leap year this year, so they're divided between the 2 weeks. And Tazria Mitzorah are definitely the more challenging portions of the Torah. And in fact, I think Bart typically tells me this is his favorite portion. So I guess he synchronizes to come back specifically on this portion. I'm being a little bit sarcastic, actually, right, Bart? I don't see him, right? Because it's a more challenging portion. I mean, it's a challenging portion in the sense of connecting with the understanding of the details, because the 2 portions deal with tsaras, which is the modern translation would be leprosy, although it's not leprosy in a conventional sense, in a medical sense, but we call it leprosy for want of a better word. But it's tsaras. It's this condition. It's a condition. It's a disease. I don't know if you would call it a disease, but it's a condition which strikes a person's body. It could strike a person's clothing. It could strike a person's house. And that's what the 2 portions go through, all of the different manifestations of this condition. Discolorations, red and green and white on the skin, all these different discolorations, and hairs popping up out of nowhere. And it's a pretty graphic description of all the different experiences that a person could have in his body, on his skin, in his clothing, and in his house as well. So it's tricky. It's a tricky series of portions because a lot of details, as I said, and it's hard to really, even the laws themselves are complicated. But the question is why the Torah goes to such great lengths talking about this, and it's one of these things again where it seems so disproportionate to the mitzvahs and the other mitzvahs which we have, all the big mitzvahs like Shabbos and not to murder, not to steal. The Torah doesn't spend so much time at all on those mitzvahs. I mean, the amount of verses and words which are dedicated towards Shabbos and not murdering, not stealing, are very few words compared to this. I mean, this is another example like the Beis Hamikdash, the elaboration on the tabernacle, tremendous detail. But this one, in terms of this very, very focused, specific law of tsaras, 2 portions, whole portions dedicated to it. So it really begs the question, why the Torah does spend so much time with it. I don't know if I'm going to necessarily answer the question fully, but it's one of these enigmatic aspects of the Torah, but certainly points to generally the appreciation that the Torah is more than simply a history book. It's more than simply a chronicle of events and facts and figures. The Torah is so deep. There are so many layers and levels of meaning of the Torah, and it really comes out clearly when you see this disproportionate focus on certain subjects versus others, topics which seem so insignificant or less significant, and the Torah goes to town talking about them. It really points to the idea there's something much more going on with the Torah than meets the eye, that Hashem desires to now elaborate on these particular points over here. So we have to, as we say, we have to know what we know and know what we don't know, right? And if we don't understand the full depth and the full understanding of this, then it's okay, because a person didn't write the Torah. Hashem wrote it, and there's wisdom, and there's all sorts of meaning, and there's symbolic and spiritual, mystical meaning of it, and whatever we can get, we can get. But we should just at least understand. Obviously, we have 2 weeks now. We've got this week and next week, so we have to talk about it. So a question though is tsaras? I mentioned it briefly. Is it a natural or a supernatural phenomena? Is it natural or supernatural? So the truth is that for many years, I always just assumed it was completely supernatural until I started seeing commentaries last year. And we spoke about this last year a little bit as well, It's not it's not it's supernatural and natural. And what I mean by that is that depending on where it comes, if it strikes the body, then many commentators say that there's a natural dimension to that. It has a biologic aspect to it. I mean, aside from the fact that the body itself is producing some type of kind of mutation, which is causing the blotches to appear on the skin. So there is a biological dimension to it. So it has a natural phenomena to it. But even some commentators say, the Ibn Ezra, famous medieval commentator, even says that it has a contagious nature to it. So tsaras on the skin is definitely physical. It's definitely a biological process, and it's certainly natural in that respect. And it may even have this contagious nature to it as well. But tsaras on the garments and tsaras on houses are completely supernatural. The commentaries say that it's completely a supernatural phenomenon. Of course, we can relate to that. Also, if I lift my arm up, and all of a sudden I see this green or red blotch on the arm of my sweater, completely supernatural. It's miraculous. So that's the difference between tsaras on the body and tsaras on garments and on the house. On the body, it has a natural dimension to it, but on the garments and on the house, it's completely supernatural. So the Rambam says, I'm going to read to you several paragraphs from the Rambam in the Laws of Tsaras, where he mentions this and then goes on further to explain the reason why tsaras even happens in the first place. But first of all, he says, this is in chapter 16, law number 10 in the Laws of Tsaras. He says, this change that affects clothing and housing, which the Torah described with the general term of tsaras, is not a natural occurrence whatsoever. So that's the distinction between clothing and the houses and on the skin. And I'm going to come back to that later on to explain why perhaps there is a difference between the two of them. But then he continues to discuss the very famous explanation of why tsaras occurs. And this is based upon the Talmud, so I'll read parts of it. He says, it's a sign and a wonder prevalent among the Jewish people to warn them against lashon hara, undesirable speech. We know that's a primary causation of tsaras. When a person speaks lashon hara, the walls of his house change color. If he persists in speaking lashon hara, it doesn't change, then it goes on to the clothing he wears. They change color. So it starts off in the most distant part of ourselves. The house begins to experience the phenomena. And as a wake-up call, I'm speaking lashon hara. If I persist in my lashon hara, so then the clothing change color. If he persists in his wickedness, then his skin undergoes changes as well. So it takes place in a graduated way. It's a constant reminder, a wake-up call that wake up, otherwise things are going to get worse. And the Torah warns about this, stating in Deuteronomy 24:8-9, take care with regard, the verse says, take care with regard to a tsaras blemish. Remember what God your Lord did to Miriam. And this is one of the commandments, to remember what Hashem did to Miriam. Because contemplate what happened to the prophetess Miriam, because she spoke lashon hara against Moshe, and then she experienced tsaras, as the Torah describes. And the Torah says, remember, this is in Devarim, remember what happened to Miriam. Because of her lashon hara, she experienced tsaras. So we have to remember that. And I understand we don't have tsaras today. I forgot to mention that we don't have tsaras today. It doesn't mean leprosy maybe happens today, but tsaras in the form that it's being described over in the Torah and the Talmud, we don't have today. But the message certainly applies. The message is always applicable. It's eternal. And that is, remember what happened to Miriam, that she experienced tsaras because of what? Because of the lashon hara she spoke against her brother Moshe. And she was immediately punished with tsaras. And that's the message. That's one of the primary messages of it. And he says, the Rambam says, this is the path followed by the gathering of wicked fools to speak lashon hara, to be hanging around with people who are just speaking slander and lashon hara. In the beginning, they speak excessively about empty things, nonsense types of things. As Ecclesiastes states, the talk of a fool is characterized by a multitude of words, talking and talking, yapping away. And then as a result of this, they come to speak negatively of the righteous, as reflected by the verse in Psalms 31:19. May the lying lips be silenced, those which speak falsehood about a righteous man. And as a consequence, They'll become accustomed to speaking against the prophets and casting aspersions on their words, as reflected by the verse in Chronicles. They would abuse the messengers of God, scorn his words, and mock his prophets. And this would lead them to deny God's existence entirely. So I'm just skipping through pieces over here. The Rambam's describing the terrible ills of speaking negatively, speaking Lashon Hara, what it leads to. But he concludes by saying, in contrast, the speech of proper Jewish people only concerns words of Torah and wisdom. Therefore, the Holy One, blessed be He, assists them and grants them merit because of it. As Malachi states, this prophet Malachi, then those who fear God conversed, each person with his fellow, and God listened and paid heed, and a book of remembrance was composed before him for those who fear God and contemplate his name. And he finishes up by saying, blessed be the merciful one who grants assistance. So this is the understanding, the explanation. And it's a common. I mean, people know this. People know this already. This is the cause of tsaras, and but the Torah, as I said, goes to great lengths describing this. So obviously, it really underscores the tremendous importance and the seriousness of not speaking lashon hara. Lashon hara is one of the most deadly, forces which affect people and affect society and destroy society and destroy people. We know from personal experience that everything in our lives, we recognize how lashon hara and slander can utterly destroy people's lives. So perhaps this is the reason why the Torah is going to great lengths describing this issue of tsaras, because it's a very, very powerful message to us that lashon hara and slander is deadly, and we've got to keep away from it like fire. And conversations and discussions and whatever we're talking about, to be constantly mindful: am I speaking? Are my words positive words, or are they negative words? Are they focusing in on what people are doing wrong? Or are they focusing in on what people are doing right? And that's what lashon hara and slander is all about. But before I want to get more into that in a few minutes, because another point which is the point which I mentioned earlier, that tsaras of the garments are unusual. Tsaras of the garments and the houses are very different to the tsaras of the skin, because we said this tsaras on the skin is more of a more of a biological phenomena, but the appearance of tsaras on garments on the house, completely miraculous, the Rambam says, and others say as well, completely miraculous, no logical explanation to it. So the question really is why? Why did the garment? I'm going to zero in specifically on garments. We're not going to talk about the houses, just garments. What is special about garments? Why should garments experience miraculous tsaras and the skin not be miraculous? And another point as well is when you examine the laws and the details of tsaras, there's a couple of laws which make tsaras and garments unique. In that, number one, it's and not just unique but stricter as well. The laws of tsaras on garments is stricter. So one of the reasons why it's stricter is that if a person's garment has an affliction, has a tsaras affliction on it, and it's there for 2 weeks, don't worry about all the details. It's there for 2 weeks, and it doesn't go away, and it remains there for 2 weeks. It's automatically declared to be impure, even if it doesn't spread further. That's not the case with skin tsaras. It's a technicality. Skin tsaras, if it's there for 2 weeks without spreading it, he's not declared tamei, impure. But with garment tsaras, he is declared impure after 2 weeks without spreading. So the point is, purely, it's stricter. Laws are stricter when it comes to garment tsaras. And another example is that one of the rules of tsaras is that the person who had tsaras in those days would be kicked out, would be sent out. I shouldn't say kicked out, would be sent out of the camp. He'd have to go out of the camp and go into quarantine in order to meditate, to reflect upon what he's done wrong, the lashon hara, etc. So when it comes to tsaras on the skin, so the Torah differentiates between walled cities and unwalled cities. Sounds like Purim, walled cities and unwalled cities. So the only kinds of cities that a person with tsaras on the skin is expelled from and quarantined from is a walled city, but not an unwalled city. So if you're living in an unwalled city, you wouldn't have to kind of go out. You wouldn't have to be sent far off, away from the city. I don't exactly know. Maybe there has to go to a certain distance away, but it's not as strict with regard to unwalled cities. In contrast, though, With garment saras, it doesn't make a difference. Even if you're in an unwalled city, the law of being sent away out of the camp is the same as a walled city. The only point I'm making over here is the fact that the laws are stricter when it comes to garment saras versus skin saras. That's the only point I'm making. So again, we have these two characteristics which are unique to garment saras. Number one, it's completely, utterly miraculous. And number two, the laws are stricter. So is there any understanding, any appreciation behind that? So Rav Samson Raphael Hirsch, famous rabbi in Germany, commentator, so he says that the way to appreciate this is to go back to, again, what the purpose of tsaras was. What is the reason why tsaras is coming? So Lashon Hara. But Lashon Hara is only really one of the larger issue, the larger problem. What is the larger problem? The larger problem is social sins. Social sins. That's the more broader issue, which is the causation of tsaras, social sins. Slander, Lashon Hara, spreading gossip, just altogether having a very, very, I'm going to say a very negative and insidious and critical outlook on people, and which brings about, all of the social sins that we experience. Social sins, that's the causation of Lashon of tsaras. So when we examine ourselves, when we look at the structure of the human being, so to speak, the structure, right? So when you take a step back and look at us, we as people, we have a body, right? Then we have our clothing, and then we have a house. We have the shelter around us. So it's really interesting. It actually parallels the three levels of the soul within us, because we have a nefesh, ruach, neshama. Right, the neshama is the essence of who we are, and then the ruach is the first outer shell of spirit out around ourselves, and then the more external spirit is the nefesh. So we're not going to go into the details of the different levels of the soul, but those three levels, are reflected in the body, the clothing, and the house around us. So if you map the three things together, so our body would be more akin to our souls, but the clothing would be more akin to the second level, which is the ruach part of the soul. So what is the ruach part of the soul responsible for? The ruach part of the soul is more the character traits. So this is what we're told, that the character traits, the good midos of a person, are really the repertoire of the ruach, of the spirit, the second level of the soul. The neshama, the deeper part of the soul. The neshama is the deepest part of ourselves, which connects to Hashem. That's the more spiritual side of ourselves. But the ruach, that next level of soul, is the character traits, the midos of a person. So the midos, in the same way that the clothing of our body protects our body, then our midos, our character traits, and our good midos protects our soul. It's a very, very interesting insight. This is actually seen in this pasuk in Ecclesiastes in Koheles. It says, "B'chol eis yiyu b'godecha levonim." Let your garments always be white. Make sure to take your clothes to the laundromat and the dry cleaning as frequently as possible. Let your garments be always white. Obviously, it's not talking about keeping your clothes clean. It's referring to keeping your character traits clean. But garments are considered the character traits, the good midos. So King Solomon is telling, make sure your character traits, your midos, are always kept clean and shining and sparkling. Midos, because those midos. Those midos are the garments for your soul. The garments for your soul. I think it's a beautiful idea that the soul, the neshama within, is the part which connects us to Hashem. That's the ultimate. That's the eternal part of ourselves. That's going to live forever. That's when we pass on. The neshama is really that part which connects us most deeply with Hashem, which we can have in this world as well. But the clothing for the neshama, and the thing which keeps the neshama in check and kind of straight and able to experience the divine connection, is through the midos as well, the character traits. So, I've spoken about this so many times. So people, believe people who are disconnected from Torah and from Judaism, they think that all that matters is good midos and being a mensch. It's not true, obviously. There's much more to Yiddishkeit than just being a mensch. It's the neshama within. It's all the mitzvahs. It's all of the other spiritual and ritual mitzvahs, which also are an essential part of who we are. But the garment and the protective shield are the midos, or the character traits. So the midos and the character traits are symbolized by the garments. So if it's true that tsaras, the particular purpose of tsaras, is to be a punishment and a response to a person's social sins of lashon hara and slander and the like, so then it's logical, right, that the garments are going to be the primary target and going to experience the most manifest experience of that punishment. And that's why the laws are stricter when it comes to garment tsaras, because the garments, that's where it's really at. Because the whole problem with the person, why the person's experiencing it, is because he's failing in his social etiquette, in his social behavior, in his midos. He's speaking lashon hara, etc. So therefore, what's going to get stricken the first? It's going to be that part of him which represents the midos and the corruption of the midos, which is his garments themselves. And that's also perhaps as well why the tsaras on the garments is completely supernatural. The message needs to be hit home very strongly that there's something amiss, there's something problematic with your midos, right? And that's how Rav Samshua Farhash explains the reason why garments tsaras is more serious. But again, the problem is, the issue is the social sins. It's these social sins. It's the bein adam lechavero. The bein adam lechavero aspect of our, Judaism, and I spoke about this last week. It's what we spoke about last week. About balancing proper refinement and behavior and how we eat. We spoke about this last week. How we eat. We should eat properly, have good manners in how we eat. And I gave the example of two people sitting at the table. You can have one person sitting there, and he's gobbling down he's in a very, very unrefined way. He's just gobbling down the food, but it's kosher food. And the next person is eating in a very refined way, but he's eating non-kosher food. What's worse, right? What's worse? Is it better to eat kosher food in a very disgusting and unrefined way, like a slob, or is it better to eat non-kosher food in a refined and very refined way? Well, right, the answer is, first of all, you have to do both. Number one, both are essential. But I mentioned last week, and I'm going to emphasize again, it's strictly speaking, not strictly speaking, but halachically, it's much worse to eat treif in a refined way than to eat kosher in an unrefined way. That's just the fact. It's more serious of a sin of eating non-kosher food. But the point I'm making is that in that verse again, you have this reminder of the balance. We have the midos and we have the spirituality. The spirituality and the midos, they all go hand in hand. There's no one more than the other. Everything has to be there. And if a person's excelling in their spirituality, they have to think, am I excelling in my midos? If I'm excelling in my midos, am I excelling in my spirituality? It's a comprehensive system. It's a holistic system. So here also with the tsaras as well. The tsaras, and actually the whole message of the tsaras primarily is actually in that area of midos. That's what we're saying over here. But as I mentioned before, that what is the root? What is the real root of bad midos? I mean, this is a conversation we could have for a long time. What is the root? What really stimulates, or what is the root cause of bad midos? So some will say it's gaiva, it's arrogance. It's arrogance. A person's full of himself, so therefore that leads to bad midos and bad relationships with other people. However, I'm not saying that's not true. It is true as well. But there's something which is also alluded to in this parsha, which also tells us the root of bad midos and social sins. And amongst the sins which the Gemara says causes lashon hara, causes tsaras, aside from lashon hara, aside from slander, is what's called tsaras ayin. Tsaras ayin. So tsaras ayin, it's an interesting term. Tsaras ayin means stinginess of the eye. Stinginess of the eye. It means almost like a narrow-minded, narrow-focused look at things. And that refers to stinginess of the eye, to only focus on the negative, to be preoccupied with the negative. You're narrow-eyed, so to speak. You're narrow-eyed, only focusing on the negative of other people. And obviously, when you think about that, it's that all of the conflicts and all of the arguments and all the fights and all of the discord which happens in relationships, it's all because people are focusing on what's not there. That's what it is. Like, if it's so fundamental, what's not, because I'm preoccupied with what's not there, so then a fight starts. Right? If we could control that perception and not focus on what's not there and focus on what is there, you wouldn't have discord. You don't have that slander. You don't have the lashon hara. You'll be able to get along with people so much better. So tsaras ayin, stinginess, tightness, narrowness of the eye to only see the negative, is really what the causation of the whole thing is. That's what really brings ultimate social sin. So when I said the expression tsaras ayin, some of you may have thought, aren't I saying tsaras? Sounds very similar, correct? Well, the answer is, it does sound very similar, except there's two different words. Tsaras is a one word by itself. Tsaras ayin is two words. So in order to help you, in order to explain this, I'm going to share my screen. The tsaras, right, here's the word tsaras, which is leprosy, or whatever, tsaras, tzadi reish ayin tov, right? However, when the Gemara speaks about the causation being tsaras ayin, stinginess of the eye, is stinginess, tightness of the eye, tightness of the eye. But look how I wrote it out over here. I wrote tsaras, that means stinginess, tightness, focusing only on one thing, of the ayin, of the eye. The letter ayin is also the word ayin, which is eye. So what you see over here, so the tsaras ayin is tightness, narrowness of the eye, of the ayin, of the eye. So inside the word tsaras, or the word tsaras itself, contains that very issue itself. In the word tsaras is the word tsaras ayin, but where the ayin is stuck in the middle over there. And it's interesting because where is the ayin, the letter ayin, which means eye, where is it in the word? It's squashed in the middle of the word. It's squashed in the middle of the word tsaras. So the word tsaras really perfectly reflects the very issue as to why tsaras comes in the first place, because there is tsaras ayin, there's narrowness of the ayin, of the eye. The eye is squashed to only see the negative, right? They only see the negative. Halavai, we shouldn't make our eyes squashed. Halavai, we should see the positive. Halavai, we shouldn't be only focusing on the negative. And if we would take the ayin out, right, the narrow eye out of the word tsaras, of the word tsaras, and put it out and give it lots of nice space, and to be more expansive and seeing more positive in people and seeing the positive in the world, and we give it lots of space, and we stick it at the beginning of the word, ayin at the beginning of the word, so now there's more space now. What do you have now? You have atzeres. And what does atzeres mean? It's a celebration. Atzeres is Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres, and Atzeres is, and it's the last days of Yom Tov are called an Atzeres. Whenever we talk about the last days of a Yom Tov being called Atzeres, we're referring to the fact that Hashem is, Atzeres brings us closer to Him. The word Atzeres actually means to kind of draw close, that Hashem draws us close to Him and keeps us back one extra day on the Yom Tov, having spent 7 days, 7 days with Him in the Yom Tov. The 8th day is called Shmini Atzeres. That's with Sukkot. On Pesach, it's the same thing. But the word Atzeres refers to Hashem holding us back and keeping us to Himself. So it's a celebration. It's a Yom Tov. So look at that. So isn't that beautiful? How if the ayin is in the middle of the word, where the eye is all stingy and only looking at the negative, so then all you have is tsaras ayin. You have tsaras. But if you take it out, we expand our vision and look at the world more positively, look at people more positively. You have atzeres, you have a Yom Tov, your life turns into a Yom Tov. So that's number one. That's the first allusion to the problem of negative thinking, negative perceptions of things. That's tsaras, the word tsaras. That's the primary word in the parsha. But another word which comes up in the parsha, which is in the subject of tsaras, is this is the word nega. Nega. The word nega is affliction. Really, technically speaking, the way the sequence of how tsaras is determined, first a nega appears on the skin. It's an affliction. It's not officially tsaras until it's determined to be tsaras by inspection by a kohen. So first it's a nega, then it becomes tsaras by virtue of the declaration that it's really indeed tsaras. But first it's called a nega. But these are the two operative words. The two primary words are tsaras and nega. Now this verse over here, this verse actually is chapter 13, verse 55. And this verse over here is actually describing the garment tsaras. And the verse says, Lo hafach ha-nega es eino. So when the nega, the affliction on the garment, stays there, I mentioned, for 2 weeks, and it doesn't go away, it hasn't changed, then the verse continues to say that the garment is declared tameh, declared to be contaminated, and has to be burned. But the verse says, Lo hafach ha-nega es eino. The nega did not change eino, its appearance. That's the simple meaning of the verse. The nega didn't change its appearance, so therefore now it becomes officially tsaras. Fine. That's what it means literally, the pashup pshat, the plain meaning of the verse. But if you darshan it a little bit and kind of expand the meaning a little bit, so one meaning is lo hafach ha-negas eino, where the word eino doesn't just mean appearance, but means the eye. Again, eye. Ayin is eye. So it would mean that the nega did not cause his eye to change. Didn't cause the person's eye to change. Which means one level, he didn't reflect about what happened. He didn't pay attention to what was going on. He didn't take the lesson of why this is happening. But then the other explanation given by the famous Gera Rebbe, the Chedusha Rebbe, he says that the nega itself, this word nega, the nega itself, the affliction, did not change its eye, its ayin. What is that referring to? Well, again, the word nega, let's look at the word nega. Nega is spelled nun gimel ayin. It has an ayin at the end. So an ayin means eye. So as long as the ayin, the eye, is at the back, is not, when I say ayin, I mean the positive ayin. The positive ayin is at the very end, and not at the beginning, and not at the forefront of a person's life, then yes, life is one big nega, one big affliction. Life is miserable. But if you stick the ayin at the beginning of the word, right? Ayin at the beginning, and you put your eye at the front, you put your positive eye as the first foot forward always, then what you have oneg. You have one big delight. Life is a delight. It's like an oneg Shabbos. So the verse is saying, Lo hafach ha-nega eino. The nega, the affliction, did not have its ayin turned around to be put at the beginning, tragically. Instead, it was just a nega, it's an affliction, because our positive eye is last on the list of things to do. So because of that, it's a nega, it's an affliction. Life's an affliction. Right? But if a person puts his positive eye at the beginning and makes that the first and foremost attitude towards everything that he experiences, towards himself, towards other people, then life is an oneg. People are an oneg. People are a delight. People are enjoyable. People don't bother me. People don't upset me. I don't get irritated because I'm only focusing on the good. I'm focusing on the good in people. So therefore, everything is fine. Everything is good. So that is the message. It's a beautiful message. So in those words, tsaras and nega is the whole message. So I was thinking it to myself. I don't have an answer to these questions. Maybe we can talk about it. But the question I was wondering to myself is, what really drives people to be negative? Like, what is the drive to be negative? And why some people, I know, I was thinking to myself before we began, some people are just naturally positive. They just naturally have this proclivity towards positivity. And then there are people who just naturally, so I don't, what really causes that? So I had one thought I was thinking about, just interesting, that focusing on the negative has a positive to it as well. Because if you don't see the negative, then you don't improve. right? If you don't, if all I'm seeing is the positive, so then what room is there for improvement? Because everything is fine. So it's a paradox a little bit, because you have to look at the negative. You have to be focused on the negative, because if you don't focus on the negative, you don't improve. Perhaps, as a thought, maybe the way that we're supposed to apply this, when it comes to ourselves, within ourselves, yes, we have to be more focused on the negative in ourselves in order to change, to refine ourselves, to fix ourselves. But in relationships, that's a given. That's a very important thing. Relationships, is clear that the predominant force in relation has to be focusing on the positive, because that's what and that's with Saras and Lashon Hara, that's what it's because it's all that's focused on the negative, the preoccupation, what she doesn't have, what she doesn't do, what he doesn't do, what he doesn't do. It's always what's missing. It's always what's missing. That's what causes all of the kind of the discord in relationships. So perhaps that's maybe the proper application for negative thinking is when turned inward to recognize my internal flaws, but not outward. Outward, that's why I think remember here we have two eyes, right? One eye is to look at ourselves, and the other eye is the one eye, maybe the left eye, which is din, right? Left is din. So maybe the left eye, right, is the eye of din, of justice, and seeing and focusing on the strict measure of justice, and the negative. Turn that towards yourself, right? Turn that towards yourself. But the positive eye of rachamim, of merchmanis and kindness, that has to be focused outward. So, but how we reconcile these particular points? Certainly, the message is very clear that we have two portions. We have two portions to remind us of the importance of positive thinking, because that's really the sum total of this whole thing. We have two portions. So, if someone asks you, why does the Torah devote so much time to tzaras? You can say because being positive is so important, and that's why we have two portions. Because positive thinking and positive attitudes towards others is a critical thing for social success and our own success, and also our own spiritual success, because our outer character is what protects on the Shama within and allows it to be able to connect to Hashem. So may we all may we all succeed in improving our positive outlook, especially towards other people, and to see the positive in others. And our lives should be an oneg, should be a delight. It should be an atzeres. It should be a yom tov all the time. And we should only get along with each other with peace and harmony and love and respect and kindness, and bring the Mashiach as a result of that as well.